Hey, welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. As always, I'm your host, Pat. So, the last update a couple of weeks ago, took a break off there for Thanksgiving, got me thinking about doing a top 100. It was in the back of my head before that. I thought, like, wouldn't that be fun? Question mark. To do a top 100 as of right now of all time. My favorite records of all time through the lens of where I am currently in my life and my listening tastes. For example, I'm not going to be talking about like Scatterbrain, Here Comes Trouble, just because I love that record as a 7th grader doesn't mean it really holds up, for me nowadays. But I thought it'd be cool to get together a fairly arbitrary but relatively comprehensive pile of records, 100 of them, and actually do my best to really rank them. I'm definitely one of these wishy-washy content creators, music record collector dudes who gets online and is like, well, they're not in any particular order, especially with the end-of-year lists and stuff like that. I thought I would like to challenge myself this time and actually go from 100 to 1. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Already I'm like, oh yeah, there's this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. So in addition, maybe I'll do... perhaps at the end of everything, I'm going to split this into 4 uploads. At the end of everything, perhaps I'll do a honorable mention or like I forgot these, because already I'm thinking of like at least 5 albums that are super important to me that some of them might crack the top 20 that I just didn't think of. I had a slow day at work. It was a slow morning, so I figured I'd throw together a list, and I started to color code through everything. By, with a highlighter saying, oh, this should be in the top 10, and then like a red pencil for the top 20, and, that kind of thing. I was very methodical about it. So what we're going to get into here is records 100 through 76. Now, I didn't really, like I said, this is going to be fairly arbitrary way up here. I'm not going to agonize over ranking stuff that's way up in the hundreds. Obviously, when we get down to like the top 25, top 20, that's going to be a little bit more of like strong competition for my heart and my mind kind of thing. But I thought it might be cool, might be interesting to show off to you folks 100 albums that have shaped me as a person that I still consider favorites. Most of them are older. Most of them are from the heyday of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, but there's a few recent ones in here. I try to think of stuff that I got into the past like decade or so it's peppered throughout. But the stuff that impresses upon you when you're younger is the stuff that usually you go to over and over again and stays with you. So let's begin. Number 100. And also counting these down is I know I'm gonna just mess this up. I'm just gonna apologize in advance. We'll see if I can actually follow through with this. Number 100 was originally released as a demo, I believe, but it's a full-length, album-length demo that got pressed on a bunch of different formats. I think tape, CD, and vinyl, if I'm not mistaken, on Hell's Headbangers, and I think maybe another label or two. Cleveland, Ohio's Nekrofilth, Worship Destruction. I think these guys moved. I think the chief songwriter moved out west or something, but they were based in Cleveland when this came out. This is just sick, raw, back-to-basics, ugly, punkish 80s style death metal. If you're into Slaughter and Repulsion, look no further. Like the death demos and stuff like that. Just real gross and depraved, perfectly catchy, strongly rooted in crossover and hardcore punk, but very much death metal stuff. I love this. I listened to this into the ground when I first got it. I still throw it on. It still holds up. There's been a few death metal bands like this over the years, I feel like have really kind of kept the spirit of the OG vibes, the OG scene, the OG feeling of Repulsion and Slaughter and early Carcass and stuff like that. Bands like Bone Sickness, I feel like that Bone Sickness full length was incredible. Sonic Poison, also another one that I just loved, but I love this stuff. Just so much attitude, just so much depravity. It's great. And I like most of their stuff, but nothing really quite hits like that for me. Next up, Christian Mistress, number 99, Agony and Opium. As I was saying a few updates back, I've checked out other stuff that this band has done. They're from Seattle or Portland, I want to say, Pacific Northwest. I've checked out almost everything they've done since this, but nothing quite delivers the way this EP does. This came out in the early 2010s, I want to say, or maybe mid, somewhere around there. It's a 6-song mini LP, and it just kills. Traditional metal with just tons of attitude, lots and lots of like great melody to it. This kind of husky, sort of like smoky vocals from the front woman that evokes to me, I mean, metal singers plenty, but also like maybe Susie Sue or something like that. It's just great vocals all around, and so many hooks. So many hooks, tearing you apart like Hellraiser. So good. Then this next band, you know, any other year previous to this, recently, I would have gone with their debut. This is number 98, Endpoint Aftertaste. Any other time in my life, I would have gone with In a Time of Hate, their first album, which is a fantastic, like, traditional hardcore, more or less, fast, for lack of a better term, kind of youth crew record. Although there's some metal elements on it and some kind of more melodic vocal phrasing and stuff like that. Recently, the past couple of years, I've been going to their other records just as much, if not more. This is their third LP. Came out on Doghouse Records in the early 90s, 1993. At this point, they were starting to take a lot more cues from other elements in their local scene in Louisville, Kentucky. There's sort of that emotional hardcore thing going on there with Guilt and Falling Forward. A lot more kind of like heavy, slower, and melodic stuff getting involved in this. Great kind of heavy guitar tone on this. Kind of pained melodic vocals. When they play fast, there's a song on here called Keating. That's awesome. That's got like these sort of harmonics. And the song, the title track, Aftertaste, is also excellent. Rob Pennington is one of my favorite lyricists. Everything that he puts across on a personal level and political level has always been great. The band that they did after this, By the Grace of God, is another favorite of mine from back in the day. I don't think any of their records made it into the top 100, but they easily could have if I would have thought of it at the time. The closer, Survival Song, is an acoustic number with male and female vocals, and it's a tearjerker. This is a great record. Great kind of mature post-hardcore album from the early 90s. Then, switching gears, gotta have some death metal on here. There'll be plenty. So number 97, Incantation, Onward to Golgotha. I mean, this is a no-brainer, you know, and it's tough. There's a lot of death metal that's going to be popping up here. Again, you know, where I'm at in my life right now, there probably would have been more, like if I made this list 3 or 4 years ago, and it's all arbitrary. But I mean, this is a masterpiece. Obviously, if you're into any kind of modern death metal, Incantation laid the template for it quite a bit, especially with what's been going on in the past like 10 or 15 years with the kind of revival death metal stuff that's been going on. Nobody will do it like Incantation for this style. For lack of a better term, the whole kind of cavernous blah, 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 whatever. But especially the production and the overall sound of this LP, I feel, is its strong suit. The songs were available on a lot of other recordings previous to this. This is a good example of a band doing tons of demos and 7 inches and other versions of a lot of the songs that ended up on here, but they all sound significantly different on the previous recordings. The overall production is so suffocating. It's like a gross, wet, mildewy blanket kind of just choking the life out of you. It's just claustrophobic and scary. You can see what so many bands were going for after this. It's a masterpiece of early 90s death metal, and what's amazing is that they were able to follow it up with several records that really held it. There was no sophomore slump with them. Like this, everything they've done, everything they did after this for years was like to the same standard of quality as this record. But I had to go with this because it was the first one that I heard. My good buddy Matt dubbed it for me years ago. Here's one that's newer to me. Thergothon, Stream from the Heavens. I was never sure if it was Thergothon or Thergothon. Before I heard other people say Thergothon, I always said Thergothon. But that sounds like a big sales event. So it probably is Thergothon. That sounds more evil. You know, come down to the Thergothon. We got Thurgas flying out the door. Come down to the Jersey Auto Mile. Anyways, Thergothon, Stream from the Heavens. I listen to this all the time. For the longest time, until I got addicted to falling asleep to podcasts and YouTube videos, this was a big sleepy time record for me, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It just sent me off to Dreamtime so beautifully. It's a stunningly beautiful record while being simultaneously ugly as hell. It's just got these wonderful, mournful, slow, glacial movements within it. And it's so dark and disturbing and morbid and simultaneously gorgeous. It's just a lovely, pioneering funeral doom record, I believe. It's a Finnish band. You know, this is from the 90s. It's great. It's great. I wish I had been listening to it long ago, but I feel like I got into it like maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So better late than never. Now we got a sentimental one. This is, I don't know, kind of an interesting thing. Growing up, my parents were Deadheads. This is Grateful Dead, American Beauty. Yeah, this is, I'm going to just put captions from here on out. So, weird relationship with this record. I hated hippie shit in high school. The whole hippie thing was huge where I grew up. One of the members of Fish was from a suburb of my hometown. Growing up, I was very much into punk and metal. You know, the whole jam band thing was huge where I grew up, which was a big college town. And all the jock kids were wearing, you know, drug rugs and tie-dye, and they played lacrosse, and they weren't really into peace and love. They were assholes. But eventually I came around to the Dead. My parents were big fans. It took me a very long time. This is very recent. Maybe like the past 5, 6, 7 years. I think my gateway was kind of venturing into that path via Hawkwind, discovering, you know, some psychedelic stuff and traveling down that road. Now I listen to plenty of stuff that is kind of adjacent to this. I think what kind of started to wear me down was the role of this album in the show Freaks and Geeks, which is a favorite of mine, and the movie American Beauty, which, you know, is a reference to this and everything, the title of it anyway. And this is just a perfectly written, mellow, lightly psychedelic kind of folky rock record. It's a beautiful record. You know, my parents were huge fans. My mom was a huge fan. We played Ripple at her funeral. So, you know, it's kind of a heavy personal significance and everything, but it's a great album. I'm not really into the whatever weird bootleg Dick's Picks, you know, 30-minute long jam on Dark Star kind of side of the Grateful Dead. I mostly just like a few songs, a few albums, but, you know, that one's in my list now. You know, a lot of it has to do with Mom. Then Amorphis, Tales from the Thousand Lakes. So I was not on board for the Karelian Isthmus when it came out. I think I heard some songs from it on the Corporate Death Comp, if I'm remembering right. I liked Karelian Isthmus. It was already out when I discovered it, and I remember this actually debuting, seeing the reviews in the magazines, being really stoked on it. I'd never heard anything before that incorporated the weird Moog organs. You know, I'd heard Nocturnus with their keyboards and some of the like harpsichordy stuff on My Dying Bride's early recordings, and I dug it. But this went into weird kind of like prog rock territory, which I didn't even know really what that was at the time, and it really knocked my socks off, like the combination of the deep Finnish death metal growls and all the almost weirdly like folky, proggy elements and touches on it. It's just a cool record. Gone back and forth on it a few times over the years, kind of fell out of love with it for a little while, and now I'm fully back on board. I just purchased this on vinyl to have it on vinyl because I wanted, you know, a wax copy of it not that long ago. I've had it on CD forever, but yeah, listen to the crap out of it when it came out. Templars, Omni Datum Optimum. This is killer Oi stuff. I used to be a lot more into a lot of Oi and street rock like 10 plus years ago. I still listen to a fair amount of it. Templars very well might be my favorite band of this genre. Just killer stuff from New York that's been around forever, since like late 80s or early 90s, I want to say. They have a bazillion records. Most of them are pretty damn good. They've managed to weave in a little bit of like hard rock influences here and there in touches, although nothing excessive. Songs like The 60s Are Over have like, you know, kind of like a Lynyrd Skynyrd kind of vibe. This is their most well-produced record, as far as I know. There might be some newer ones that are a little bit more even, but this one I think stood out with a lot of people at the time because a lot of their stuff was deliberately raw recording-wise to kind of capture that sort of 70s punk kind of thing. Very 4-track recording, and their music shone through, and it actually complemented it really well. But I do like the sound of this quite a bit, and it's got some of their favorite songs of mine. Victim, great catchy song. Guardian Angel, Boredom, like all the tracks on this are killer, including their theme song, The Templars, which is, awesome number. A lot of their stuff they're kind of like Foreskins in the way that, well, similar kind of vocal approach first and foremost, but also, they have this sort of mid-paced, catchy, soccer chantish kind of stuff, but also stuff that's a little bit more upbeat and stompy and punk, not quite hardcore. That's definitely one I've listened to over and over again throughout the years. Damnation AD, No More Dreams of Happy Endings. Crushing metallic hardcore from the early 90s. DC band, members of Worlds Collide, and I believe the brother of one of the members of Ashes. Battery was another band they were related to. I was always blown away by how dark and oppressive this music is. Lots of themes of SI, a lot of stuff relating to depression. Coming from a straight edge singer, pretty dark, twisted stuff. They had a really, really unique guitar tone that, to me, is like kind of a distant cousin to the HM2 guitar tone. It's just super gristly and abrasive, but it's not quite the same thing. They had a pretty metal guitarist guy, the whole classic paradigm of like a couple clean cut dudes and then a dude with like long scuzzy hair, that kind of scenario. Forget his name, but that dude shreds. The other guitarist, was his name Hillel, I think. The other guitarist was Ken Olden. I don't know where I got Hillel from. Okay, yeah, Hillel was the metal guitarist. Both Hillel and Ken were insane shredders. And a lot of this kind of moves at kind of a sluggish, like sludgy or almost kind of doomish sort of pace, but instead of the vocals you'd expect with like that kind of metal, it's more of like a hoarse, pained, hardcore shout. The dude sounds legitimately upset. He's not faking the funk. Spectacularly dark record. Deteriorate, Rotting in Hell. This has been a cult favorite of mine for a long time. A friend of mine and I came across a promo copy of it, with no art, just the song titles years ago in the 90s, and listened to the crap out of it. It's very Deicide influence, but again, it's got sort of a weird, gristly kind of guitar tone that's really abrasive. Again, not quite HM2, but there's something to it that sounds really... It just sounds like really hot and overdriven, the guitar tone. Just vicious death metal, old school death metal, lots of dual tracked vocals, a lot of satanic themes, some Hellraiser stuff going on with it. Don't have classic old school 90s death metal without some Hellraiser references. The Suffering, I think, is the name of the song. The Sufferance, I mean. Name of the song, it's got that classic intro sample. No tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering, But yeah, just great Pennsylvania classic straightforward death metal. And Sick of It All, Blood, Sweat, No Tears. Hardcore classic, New York hardcore classic from 1989, featuring an intro bit from KRS-One from Boogie Down Productions. Best of luck to Lou. I know he's been struggling with some issues with his health lately, with cancer. I hope everything turns out okay. Keep fighting, buddy. This record I listened to endlessly, all the time, freshman year of high school. Auto reverse Walkman on the bus over and over again. It appealed to me as a young metalhead because, again, there were elements of it that kind of reminded me a little bit of thrash. There were some heavier, like moshier elements, but it was also super punk. There's some songs on it that, like Friends Like You, that are almost like kind of have like almost like a street punk kind of feel, but a lot of stuff is like very moshy and straightforward. It's all very heavy. It's around this time I started to understand that dichotomy between fast and slow, the whole kind of breakdown thing that made the made the mosh pit so dangerous. Sick of It All really captured that like lightning in a bottle, I feel. This is a fantastic top 10 NYHC LP for sure for a lot of people, for a very good reason. And they went on to change their style up a little bit, kind of maintain the original energy of this record. They got better production, a little bit more groove later on, a little bit more metal. They went through some different changes that were all pretty interesting, but always managed to maintain and kind of, I don't want to say improve on their sound, because I think this is an untouchable record, but kind of evolve their sound without like selling anything out necessarily. So that's a classic, perfect one. Then we got GISM Detestation. Probably the first Japanese hardcore record I ever heard. I've told this story many times. My friend Mike dubbed this for me along with some gauze and I think asbestos and some other stuff. This got reissued on Relapse about, let's see, it's before I even moved to North Carolina, so it's got reissued on Relapse, I want to say in 2015 or 2016. It's great. There's nothing quite like it. Sakive's vocals sound like he's gargling glass. Randy Ucheda, the leads on it are these like great, epic sort of Iron Maiden-y, very, very metal leads, but over the kind of more punkish music with like really rough, like crass records sort of production. It's very, very much its own animal. Hugely influential to tons of music outside of Japan and within. Killer record, Detestation. Then another metallic hardcore classic from my salad days, Bloodlet's Entheogen. This is a reissue that's the full album. What came out on CD and what came out on LP in the 90s were two different things. Couldn't fit all of the music from the CD onto the 12-inch, so some stuff was cut. A389 reissued all of it on a double LP. But again, kind of like Damnation AD, they had the spirit of what was going on in hardcore at the time kind of metalized. It was very chuggy and kind of moshy, had the occasional more upbeat moment, but delved into really weird, twisted, almost kind of psychedelic, hallucinatory, scary music. Lots of odd, spidery bass lines, and vocals that kind of sounded like, kind of in between somebody like Dwid from Integrity or maybe Carl from Earth Crisis, between that and like a Barrow White or some sort of like supernatural undead thing. Live, they were always a force. Their singer had these long dreadlocks, wearing an upside down cross pendant, which was like a weird thing to see at a hardcore show at the time, believe it or not. So yeah, killer, pioneering metallic hardcore stuff, metalcore, whatever you want to call it. A lot of sludge in it too. I feel like they were probably listening to a fair amount of early Neurosis, maybe even like Buzz Oven and I Hate God, kind of combined with Metallic Victory stuff. It's just a cool band. And then, I don't know where we are. I'm going to put it up on the thing, because I know how to edit, sort of. Hawkwind, Do Re Mi Fa Sol Latido. Throw it down there in the comments if I pronounce that wrong. So, let's see. My intro to Hawkwind, I was aware of them on a couple of different levels for many, many years before I took the plunge and checked them out. For one, I knew that Lemmy was a member. I mean, anybody that read magazines and knew of the history of Motorhead knew that Lemmy was in Hawkwind before Motorhead. Another thing is that a lady that I used to hang out with, who's more of a goth lady, for whatever reason, she had a later, I think 80s era Hawkwind CD, and she mentioned that Michael Moorcock had collaborated with them on numerous occasions. I think he did record some poetry or something with them, but he would appear with them live and recite stuff. He's the guy who wrote the Elric books, and if you're not familiar, great 70s fantasy stuff. The cover art was done by the same guy who did like Obituaries, Cause of Death, and Michael Whalen, and Arise, and the Sirathungal, all that stuff, so it all ties in. But knowing all those things, I think the main thing that pushed me into checking them out, the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back of me turning into a full-fledged hippie, was the band Nine Shocks Terror, who are going to be on this list as well. Great late 90s, early 2000s, super abrasive, fast, Japanese hardcore influenced hardcore band from Cleveland, Ohio, covering Hawkwind. and they covered Brainstorm on it. Brainstorm, the original, is, I want to say, pushing 10 minutes, like between 8 and 10 minutes. They did it faster. And even though they did it faster, it was still like 5 or 6 minutes. But I remember listening to that. It was on a compilation, a Suburban Voice compilation, being like, that's pretty cool. I should check that out. So lo and behold, I don't know, probably like 15 years ago, I started getting into the Hawkwind. I started picking up some Amon Duel. I started checking out some psychedelic stuff. That kind of dovetailed with checking out Flower Traveling Band and Sir Lord Baltimore and all that kind of proto-metal stuff. Now that's like full-blown, a good quarter of what I spend my money on and listen to is stuff that this was a gateway for. So it's very important. Doreme Falso Latido. Musically, it's awesome because I would hear people talk about psychedelic music and I would check out some of it, especially the 60s stuff, like the Hate Street, San Francisco stuff. And I'm like, or like the early 13th Floor Elevator stuff. I'm like, okay, I get how this is a little weird, and they were probably under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs when they recorded this, but a lot of it just sounds like bubblegum 60s pop that has some like odder elements to it, and that's fine. I like stuff like that. Hawkwind actually sounded like somebody freaking out on acid. It actually sounded like a journey into weirdness. And it also immediately made me think of all the hippies from that one episode of The Young Ones, the party episode. Interesting. Warlock, all of Neil's friends. I'm like, now Hawkwind makes total sense. So we need to send for assistance, preferably Swedish. And then, Kreator was such an early band for me to get into, like kind of a gateway to death metal from thrash metal, if you know what I mean. Because I was listening to, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, etc., but also what was on Headbangers Ball at the time, Wrathchild America, Forced Entry, and all these kind of latecomers to thrash in the early 90s. And I'd read an article, and I can't even remember the name of the magazine. If it was Metal Maniacs, I wouldn't remember that. It was a weird one. And it wasn't Metal Edge either. It wasn't, or Hit Parader. It wasn't one of the glam rags. I don't remember what it was, but there's a whole thing on death metal, and Kreator just got lumped in with Obituary and Napalm Death and Deicide and Cannibal Corpse. Sepultura was in it too, but at the time Sepultura, largely everywhere that I saw, was considered death metal and not a thrash metal band. But Kreator's Coma of Souls was what I tracked down not that long after that, and the video for People of the Lie was big on MTV at the time. I think the first thing that I actually bought was Out of the Dark, Into the Light, and then, like, I think the same month I got this. A lot of people, I don't think anybody hates this record necessarily, but a lot of people kind of view it as a step down after Extreme Aggression, and I just have to kind of politely disagree on that. I think the production's better. I think the songwriting's better. It is a bit more melodic, I feel like they were almost one step away from doing the melodic yet really heavy thrash or death metal thing, like a little bit before Carcass did Heartwork. I feel like there's elements of like traditional metal in it, along with really heavy Teutonic thrash that are noteworthy. And I like everything Kreator did in the 80s, don't get me wrong. Especially the older I've gotten, really begun to appreciate Pleasure to Kill quite a bit. Endless Pain, especially, as raw as that record is. I love that record. But in terms of like the amount of times I've listened to this and emotional significance, this was just a constant spin for me. Coma of Souls, absolutely love it. This is a reissue with a live CD. These Noise Records reissues with the weird Photoshop jobs all over it. Not the biggest fan of that. At least it doesn't say remastered over the artwork. Hated that. But regardless, awesome. Love Kreator. Especially that record. Next up, Exploited Horror Epics. I picked this particular Exploited record for a number of reasons. This copy, which has definitely seen better days, was from my hometown record store that is no longer with us, Oliver's Records. Some older punk sold like 50 LPs or something, and my friends and I picked through them over the following year. whenever we had money. And this was, I mean, some of this stuff ended up being kind of worth a lot. Like, I got an original pressing of JFA, the first LP, for like $5, a Crucial Youth LP, a lot of great stuff. Some stuff that wasn't even really punk. Maybe it was just because it was on SST. I got Hollow's Victim by St. Vitus there for like $5. This was part of that whole score. So that's one of the reasons I picked this. Another is that this is a really unique exploited record. Not the first one that I heard. That would have been the War Now EP, which is great. I heard the Massacre after that. This was a little bit further down the line. But this is the one that I reach for the most. Just because it's weird. It's got a death rock influence. It's got that echoey drum sound. This very pronounced kind of early Killing Joke thing mixed in with their acidic Glaswegian street punk kind of thing, and it's just awesome. Particularly the last song, My Life. That's a killer jam, and it's super underrated. It's got fast songs like I Hate You and Maggie, classic, like offensive anti Margaret Thatcher song. But horror epics in My Life are like weird. It's a weird fusion of Killing Joke and the exploited, and it's great. So I listen to that a ton. That's an evergreen one for me for sure. The Wake, Masked. I got into this in the era where I was discovering a lot of goth stuff, really into Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus, The Cure, and all the rest. This was a Cleopatra release. Cleopatra Records these days just are a weird label to me. They reissue a lot of old punk stuff. They do some metal stuff. It seems kind of all over the map. But at a certain point, they were almost completely all just goth, and a lot of goth that just worshipped Sisters of Mercy. And that's what this is. It's very strongly Sisters of Mercy influenced, like very like Andrew Eldritch kind of vocal style. Certainly if you like primo era Sisters, you know, First, Last, and Always and Floodland, this will do you right. It's just a well-written, catchy gothic rock record. I listen to it into the ground and still throw it on fairly often. Carcass. Necroticism, Desanting the Insalubrious. So this was another one that like it came out and it left a huge impression on me. I bought it after it dropped. I'd heard a lot about Carcass previous to picking this up. I was familiar with bad reviews that they got in Metal Maniacs at the time. Them and Cannibal Corpse got panned a lot from that writing staff for one reason or another, called cheesy, you know, basically cheating at death metal through shock value. And I think this, in a lot of ways, was Carcass kind of like giving the middle finger to the metal press. I don't know if that was a common thing with all. I imagine they were more well-liked in Kerrang, maybe, because it was British, but I could be wrong. Kerrang panned a lot of stuff that turned out to be awesome. But this, they really showed off their technical chops. They eased back on the pitch-shifted vocals, which was something they got shit for, and really showed off that they could write these really involved compositions and also have them still be really catchy. They went out of the really heavy, down-tuned stuff as much. I don't know if the tuning changed, went a little bit up maybe, but it's definitely not as like bass-heavy as the previous record, Symphonies of Sickness, and certainly not as toilet sounding as Reek of Putrefaction. You know, it's a special kind of trained ear. You need to appreciate that record. I feel like they really kind of put together a little bit of melody, like maybe a little bit more like technical thrash kind of precision on this, and combined it with all the pathological stuff and all the medical stuff. It's a fantastic record. It's a big go-to for me. Over the years, I've come to appreciate the first two a lot more, but again, I didn't really get into them later. I was there at ground zero, no pun intended, when this came out. So super important record to me. Third Carcass LP. Leatherface, Mush. God, I need to pick this up on vinyl. Got reissued not that long ago. Most Leatherface records are great. This is probably their finest. Fill Your Boots is also very, very good. A lot of people kind of try to simplify this band and boil them down to like primo Husker Du stuff with Motorhead kind of vocals. That's all there. I think they have a personality all their own. Frankie Stubbs, fucking great musician, just whiskey throated kind of gruff vocals, but doing the melodic thing very well despite that. Awesome catchy songwriting. switching gears again. My intro to a lot of stuff. Screeching Weasel, Boogada Boogada Boogada. Technically the first kind of like pop punkish record I'd bought with my own money and really listened to. Even though this is kind of halfway between the sort of Ramonesy pop punk they'd be known for later and like snotty 80s hardcore. You know, you could say people that are big fans of Adrenaline OD or bands like that would appreciate this. Maybe even like super early 7 Seconds or something like that. It's before they really went into the whole like Ramones, maybe a touch of Beach Boys, you know, that kind of thing, that kind of influence. I love those records too. Anthem for a New Tomorrow is an absolute classic. But this is, you know, snotty, kind of, it's funny how that early wave of pop punk before Blink-182 and later whatever, like Fall Out Boy or whatever the hell is considered pop punk later on, how that really Ramonesy, quote-unquote, leather jacket pop punk stuff, how dark it was. Like, Ben Weasel's been under fire for being a shitty dude numerous times, and I'm certainly not making any excuses for any of his behavior, but there's clear, like, mental health stuff going on here that he's never been shy about, and I think that shows through in the music. Also, bands like Sloppy Seconds and the Vindictives, it's lighthearted and fun music, but there's some seriously, like, there's a lot of struggles with mental health and alcoholism and a lot of stuff that's very real about that first wave of, you know, the Lookout pop punk stuff and some of the stuff from Chicago, Sloppy Seconds, all that stuff. And it's only a handful of bands that I like that fall under that banner, but yeah, this is one of them. Then, hard for me to pick a Thin Lizzy record too, because I'm trying to keep myself to just one record by every band, because at a certain point it's going to be, you know, if I didn't limit myself, it'd end up being like 5 Corrosion of Conformity records in a row, you know, that kind of thing. 4 St. Vitus records in a row. Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy. For the longest time, the only Thin Lizzy song I knew was The Boys Are Back in Town. And I forgot why that song was so big in the like early 90s. It was after we were done with the Gulf War, the U.S. Gulf War thing, you know, which lasted all of like 2 months or whatever it was when I was in 7th grade. When the troops came back, The Boys Are Back in Town was all over the place, apparently. I completely forgot about that. But for the longest time, that was the only song I knew by Thin Lizzy. I'm trying to pronounce it correctly for the Irish out there. Tin Lizzy. And then I went to Ireland in the early 2000s. I was actually over there when 9/11 happened, talking about big world events. And all the punks I hung out with loved Thin Lizzy. You know, everybody, they were into, you know, like the usual stuff for a lot of punk rock kids at the time, you know, listening to occasionally some two-tone ska, but a lot of like Crust and Power Violence that was big at the time. Catharsis was touring Ireland, so we were listening to them a lot, but tons of sessions, parties in Irish parlance there. Tons of parties where Thin Lizzy was being played for hours on end. And if I was to pick one Thin Lizzy record, you know, this is kind of like an obvious choice or whatever, but I think it's just fantastic. It's got The Boys Are Back in Town on it. Cowboy Song, which is one of my favorites. Emerald, like a total proto-metal, like obviously a big influence on Iron Maiden with the twin leads and everything. I think Sabbath UK covered that, did a great job with that. Or maybe it was Skyclad, one of the two. Some Martin Welkier project. Warriors. Jailbreak is an awesome song. A lot of people joked about like, tonight there's going to be a jailbreak somewhere in the town. You think it's going to be the jail? Like I heard that joke a bunch of times, which is an easy conclusion to come to. It's like, yeah, what is up with that? It's based on like some kind of sci-fi theme or sci-fi story where it's like a modern dystopia where everything's a jail, which kind of sounds like we're getting closer to all the time. Which isn't a fun thing to think about, but that's what it is. There's more than one jail in the town, so somewhere in the town. For your information. All right. Neurosis, Pain of Mind. I know their sound changed leaps and bounds from this. This is their very first album. They're a hardcore punk band before they went into the kind of droney, sludgy, psychedelic, heavy, crushing, sort of progressive, whatever you want to call what they turned into like right after this, Because Word is Law is already a huge leap in the direction of where they would go later when they signed a Relapse and everything. And I like that stuff too. I like pretty much everything up to 3 Silver and Blood quite a bit. However, Pain of Mind has just a certain layer of smog and just kind of like grit over it. Even though it's fast, you've got trading off vocals. You can tell they are fans of stuff like Amoebix, and probably Rudimentary Peni. You know, it's got a sort of like manic, sort of mentally ill kind of approach to their fast hardcore. But you could hear their influence on so much, especially out of the East Bay. All that stuff, ranging from Filth to Logical Nonsense, who were transplants to the East Bay. All the kind of crust stuff that came out after this, especially the American stuff, whether it was Devoid of Faith, who else? Tragedy and His Hero Is Gone, all owe their sound to Neurosis. And they're already going in like weird directions, much like early Voivod, like the first 2 or 3 Voivod records. They hadn't really quite turned into the weird sci-fi proggy thing that they turned into. You can hear the beginnings of it with like odd bass lines. And the song Black, there's better songs, much better Neurosis songs, but it's the one slow song on this, and you can see it's like an embryonic idea of the type of stuff that they would do later. But yeah, it's super pissed, raging, dark hardcore, and I love it. Then gotta include at least most of the bands that I have tattoos of, right? So Crumbsuckers, Life of Dreams. Look at that cover art. There's something about all that Sean Taggart cover art from the 80s that is so iconic to me. Something about seeing these album covers when I was a kid just completely melted my brain. This and the cover for Cause for Alarm by AF. There's the great cover to Whiplash, the first Whiplash record with the guy just getting punched in the face. That's a fun one. He did a lot of great stuff. I think he had a hiatus period and then came back like in the late 90s or early 2000s, at least to hardcore. Did like covers for Mental and stuff. I love his early work that's like just weird paintings. I don't know what kind of drugs this guy was doing. A lot of this kind of reminds me of, 80s New York City graffiti, and like Ralph Bakshi is really what this hits for me. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I don't know if Sean Taggart's a fan of Ralph Bakshi, but these weird little Crumbsucker dudes, so odd. Anyways, can't gush enough about the art, but let me talk about the music. Top tier crossover. Their earlier stuff, these guys were from Long Island, so they were kind of on the outskirts of like the New York scene. I think they were well loved pretty quickly with the CBGB's crowd. Their earlier stuff was more straightforward, kind of hardcore. A lot of their stuff got kind of metalized, like the earlier versions from demos and stuff got kind of metalized for this first LP. But there's no fat on it. It's just nonstop raging, tight picking, thrashy, New York tinged crossover. The vocals are super gruff. They're not too different from John Brannon or Choke or something like that, like kind of throaty, raw kind of thing, which is a stark contrast to bands like DRI and Cryptic Slaughter, who sounded very West Coast, even though DRI was originally from Texas. That kind of snotty surfer kind of thing that Kurt Brecht did. This is very like raw throated, just, rabid bear kind of vocals and awesome leads, like blazing killer leads all over it that don't hamper the music and don't sound wanky. It's just a killer crossover record. One of my favorites. Their second album, Beasted on My Back, it was one that grew on me over the years. Definitely didn't really care for it that much the first time I heard it because it's a lot slower. Kind of reminded me a lot more of like some sort of weird mid-tempo kind of thrash, like almost mechanical sounding. Like it kind of reminded me of Prong and maybe the second Leeway record. Like it's a little bit more like mid-paced, but it's awesome. It's totally grown on me. That record's great. Not my favorite after Life of Dreams, but maybe my second favorite. Well, they only have 2 albums, so that kind of solves that. The Faith Void split. The eternal argument, which is better, Faith or Void. It's true, I didn't really pay much attention to Faith for the first couple of decades I was into this. The past couple of years, I've been really enjoying The Faith. It's Alec McKay's band, Ian MacKay's brother. It's great. It's kind of unhinged, fast hardcore, but it's got a little bit more involved with the riffing. Not just straight power chords. There's a little bit more thoughtful stuff going on. And the vocals are, gets a little bit more melodic here and there. Void I've been into for a long time. My friends and I all got, the Void crosses tattooed on our wrists, like a lot of people at the time. When I was super involved in hardcore, it was an era where a lot of bands were kind of taking cues from Void and Black Flag, like the sort of not perfect riffing, not always on time, kind of slightly falling apart at the seams, high energy kind of thing that bands like Void executed perfectly. There's bands like Sexvid in the mid-2000s and a bunch of other ones. Sexvid were probably the best, but honestly, I feel like and Hoax was kind of along the lines a little bit later. Although I feel like those bands were very much doing their own thing. I don't think they were like doing a worship thing. I think they were just like, yeah, we can be a little loose and crazy, Void pretty much had their own path that they were on. If I'm remembering correctly, they were kind of outliers a little bit from the DC scene at the time, the early 80s DC hardcore scene. I think they were from somewhere in Maryland or something like that. They didn't always play with Minor Threat or anything. They kind of were the OG mysterious guy hardcore dudes or something. But the music's unhinged. There's little moments, especially their most popular song, Who Are You, almost leads off with like a straight up sped up like classic rock riff. It could be something off of, I don't know, like a Deep Purple song or something, but like played at a manic pace. It's really cool. But yeah, they just have this really chaotic, falling apart kind of je ne sais quoi to them, which is killer, which is why a lot of people love it. I know a lot of stoner metal people really like Void. A lot of like doom people really like Void. And you can see it because you can hear that sort of 70s hard rock influence in it, even ever so slightly, like I've seen mock-ups of the classic art here, but with the Sun logo, like there's a Sun knockoff Void shirt and stuff. So they're well liked in that scene too. And as somebody that has been getting more and more into that stuff, the older I've been getting, I can completely see the connection. Speaking of doom, stoner stuff, killer segue, Pat. Good job. The self-titled Trouble record originally came out on Def Jam in 91, I want to say, somewhere abouts there. This is a reissue on Hammerheart. I was so stoked when all this Trouble stuff got reissued. Because for years, all I had was a copy on cassette of the Def Jam release. And it was one of those things where it's like, I want to listen to it all the time because it rules, but I don't want to wear it out because it's a tape. I'm happy to finally have this on wax. It sounds great. The early Trouble stuff is amazing. I love the Metal Blade stuff. This still might be my favorite Trouble record. Get back in there, you. They got the Rick Rubin treatment on this. They really came into their own. Like they seem to do away with a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of like early 80s new wave of British heavy metal kind of cliches and stuff like that. They kind of went more into honoring their 60s and 70s influences without it getting too out of control. I know later on Manic Frustration and Plastic Green Head and stuff past that, they went a little bit further with like, hey, we're really into Cream. Did you know that? We really like the Beatles. Check it out. There's just touches of that on here along with their previous sound, and like a lot of Rick Rubin stuff, a lot of it's stripped down. The songwriting's a lot more concise. I mean, you can look to Rain in Blood for another example of that. You can look to the Cult's Electric for just how that dude managed to just take the essence of a band and focus it into a concentrate. He did a really good job with Trouble on this, in my opinion. Nothing against Electric or Rain in Blood, but both of those bands, I kind of like their earlier stuff more a little bit. I go back and forth with Electric. I kind of over-listen to it, but I digress. With this, I feel like this is really a perfectly focused version of what this band was to become. It's just killer, slightly stonery traditional metal with a little bit of, 60s and 70s influence, a little shine from like Zeppelin and the Beatles and stuff like that, but not overdoing it, Very, very great. Okay. So there we go. That is numbers 100 through 76. I'm going to be doing these every week, hopefully. Things don't intervene too much with life and everything. So next week we'll be doing 75 through 50. That's it for now. My mouth hurts. Okay, bye.